There is a story happening in a house on your street. You see the family at church, at the grocery store, at school pickup. You see a portrait of a normal life. But often, the most dangerous stories are the ones we can't see. The ones that unfold in the quiet spaces, just below the surface. This is Peace Interrupted. Season 1, Sarah's story, is brought to you by The Journey and the Process.
You know, we talk a lot about the hard stuff, trauma, abuse, and the toll that it takes on your mind, body, and spirit. And we want you to know you don't have to walk that alone. The Journey and the Process is a trauma-specialized counseling center committed to helping individuals heal from deep wounds through clinically excellent, biblically grounded care. With offices in North Carolina and Texas, telehealth services across 5 states, and biblical counseling available globally, our team of highly trained Christian therapists and certified biblical counselors integrate faith and whole person, evidence-based practices to address trauma at its root. We believe that healing is possible because Jesus still sets the captives free. If you're ready to take that next step toward peace, visit www.thejourneyandtheprocess.com. Trauma doesn't have to eat your lunch forever. There is hope, and we are here to help you find it.
Welcome back, friends, to Peace Interrupted. We're excited to jump into another conversation about Sarah's story. And today I have with me my friend Brad Hambrick. Brad is the pastor of counseling at the Summit Church in North Carolina. He's a professor of biblical counseling at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, author of several books and presentations that you may be aware of, and really dear to my heart in our time that we spent together writing and contributing on becoming a church that cares well for the abused. So welcome to Peace Interrupted, Brad Hambrick.
It is good to get to be with you. I greatly appreciate you and the ministry of Peace Works, and so thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. Anything I missed from your bio, friend, that you'd like to share?
I don't think so. If people are interested, bradhambrick.com, they can go and get the narrative there.
Very cool. Well, brother, thank you for taking the time. One of the things we want to do in Peace Interrupted is to really illustrate and model a team-based approach, and it's nice to have pastoral voices other than mine on the show. You've listened to Sarah's story, you've interacted with it. We like to get just a general vibe from all of our guests. What are your thoughts about Sarah's story as it relates to coercive control and the things that you've experienced in your ministry?
I think the thing that stood out to me as I was listening to it is how well you have listened to people to be able to put together something that is that succinct and that clear. And so this is a hypothetical. It's a compiled case study, but the degree to which you put that together, I think, just shows how well you've listened. I would probably recommend to the listeners, maybe not after every episode like this, but after every few, go back and listen to the case study again, because you will start to hear things the second, third, fourth time you listen to it, when you've heard folks interact over it, that you will begin to tell the degree of listening that Chris has done in crafting that story. So I think you've just given us a great narrative to explore this subject.
Man, thanks for that, Brad. I appreciate the affirmation, and it was our intention to communicate coercive control in a story that was faithful to many different folks. And we hope to continue that in upcoming seasons as we attempt to tell more stories and have more interaction. As you're thinking about Sarah's story and your role as a pastor, can you just walk us through, and I know it's just helpful to have another voice besides mine, talk about the church's responsibility in addressing domestic abuse, because sometimes It can feel like that's an outside problem. That's a problem that we only refer. And I think there's a balance to be had, but I'd love to have another pastor share just some thoughts on what's the church's unique role in this type of work.
I think one thing that's unique is we often get brought in earlier.
Yeah.
That in this case, Sarah happened to work at the school that was affiliated with the church.
Yeah.
That as one friend who's at church was supporting her in a hard moment, there was this sense of like, we ought to talk to Pastor Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And so we often are one of the early people that get brought in. It's that trust and relationships around the whole situation that is not just the unique opportunity, but that also accounts for many of our blind spots.
Yeah.
Something else that's unique for the church is we have a voice and responsibility on all sides. Mm-hmm. Most other people who get involved, they have one client or one point of contact. But as a pastor, we have a shepherding role for Sarah, for Mark, for their children, for Sarah's parents, if they're a part of our church. And so, many other professionals, they get to be focused on one individual, while we offer our care in a collectivist environment. And then we're often involved much longer than other organizations. Many other organizations are just involved during the crisis phase, and as soon as the crisis settles to a non-crisis, whether it's resolved or not, we have an ongoing role that it's much harder for those other organizations to do. And so those are just some unique things that are opportunities that, if stewarded well, are of immense benefit. If they're not stewarded well, they can be as much of a curse as they are a blessing.
Yeah, I think the stewardship aspect is massive as you consider what the church brings to the table. I know for me, having worked in the secular environment for as long as I did, kind of as a participant in a community coordinated response, and for our listeners, a CCR or a community coordinated response is the common vernacular for building a team to walk along side a victim and confront a perpetrator. But the church has a natural system of teams that we could utilize. And I wonder what would be holding back or hesitant for a pastor to engage his community in the process. And I know this isn't in the hot sheet I sent you, but what do you think holds us back from connecting with counselors and social workers and people even inside our own community of faith to build teams around victims and perpetrators?
Some of it is just as simple as limit of schedules.
Sure.
There's no shortage of things on the pastor's schedule. And so as soon as you do something in a team, it's going to take longer. Yeah. That's another center of decision making. And so if you're in a church leadership system that uses elders, it's tough to tell how those different entities relate to one another because there's not a org chart and process for that. And then oftentimes our community partners, they're going to use the language of healthiness more than they use the language of holiness. And those two things ought not be in competition with one another. But when we hear what feels like a slightly different economy or set of priorities, we can get frustrated and begin to think that we disagree on foundational things when the safety of individuals in a coercive marriage, that should be a spot where healthiness and holiness can align.
Yeah, that's well said. I think we can be intimidated or fearful or protective, right, when other agencies or different languages being used. But that doesn't mean that we shy away from our calling. And certainly I would hate for anyone to come away thinking that Pastor Dave was operating in any type of malice or intentional blindness. We wanted Pastor Dave to be positioned in such a way that there's real regret, remorse that he acted in ignorance, and not that his actions were unwarranted in most cases, but in this case, he kind of had the cart before the horse. What were your impressions of Pastor Dave?
As awkward as it is to say in light of how this case study went down, I wish there were more Pastor Daves in the world.
Yeah.
Like in this case, he did miss something really important.
Right.
But in the way the case study developed, he did not double down on his blindness.
Yeah.
He had the humility that when the situation allowed his eyes to be opened, he didn't turn his head. And so that, to me, that was one of the more noble attributes of Pastor Dave.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I love pastors. I have encountered more Pastor Daves than I think I have the villain or the henchman that sometimes we hear about in pastoral ministry. I'd love to queue up a couple sections from Pastor Dave. They're going to be back to back, but I'd like to do clip number 1. Philip's going to cue that up and us to interact a little bit on that. So let's hear clip number 1, Philip.
I saw a problem I'd seen a dozen times, and I reached for the tool I always used. I reached for Scripture. I shared with her Paul's wisdom in Ephesians chapter 4. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. I thought I was helping. I thought I was giving her a roadmap back to reconciliation. I told her that by allowing this physical separation, they were inviting spiritual trouble into their marriage.
Oh, Pastor Dave, what's he thinking right now, Brad?
Yeah, I think the 3 words that probably got him off track as quick as anything were a dozen times.
Yeah.
When he's like, I've seen this a dozen times.
Yeah.
That was the thing where it just starts to short circuit good listening and assessment.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I say when I am teaching counseling and working with folks who are going to do caregiving all the time, if we don't know what we see, we won't know what to say.
Wow. Yeah.
And so many times people come up to me with the question, what do you say when?
Yeah.
And if I answer their question, I am assuming they see the situation accurately. And so, this is one where I really try to avoid using never and always and phrases like that, but I'm pretty comfortable standing behind my words here. We never apply the Bible to a situation without first interpreting the person and their situation. And if we're wrong in our interpretation of the person or the situation, we may be exegetically accurate. D.A. Carson may sign off on what we said in ways that, and again, for those that he's just a Bible scholar nerd, but what we could say would be exegetically pristine, and pastorally broken. And so, as soon as Sarah started saying a distant marriage, my impression is Pastor Dave started to read his experience of distance.
Yeah.
Whatever relationships he's had, he used her word as a Rorschach test, not that we believe in those, and projected upon that word what his experience of that word was. And from that, he gave an answer that fit his experience of distance in marriage. And so instead of asking, hey, tell me what you meant. What happened that your husband slept in the other room? We don't know from this vignette, does Pastor Dave know about the locket?
Right.
Did Sarah even get that far into the story that over a locket that was less than $30, that got crushed, or did he just begin to respond to distant?
Yeah.
And so clarify what somebody means, get the runway leading into that pivotal moment. Because if you start to teach before you've understood, there's a good chance that good exegesis may result in bad shepherding.
Fantastic. I know in the past when I've taught this principle, and Brad will appreciate this because we both have homespun turnip truck backgrounds, is I'll say our problem is when we hear hoof steps, we think horse and not zebra. But you've got to turn the light on outside just to make sure it's not a zebra. And that's what's happened here is Pastor Dave, in his well-meaning, positioned experience, hears the language that he's familiar with. And as you say, he puts himself into the story and begins to project that reality rather than pulling the rope.
And I wish I could talk to Pastor Dave. I'm going to make an assumption about the figment of your imagination that is Pastor Dave. He seems like such a sweet man, like humble, deeply caring, that I'm going to guess he has a limit of imagination.
Yep.
His ability to imagine locking his wife in a room, putting his wife in time out.
Yeah.
Like the idea that exists, and if it existed, that you would describe it as distance in your marriage.
Right.
That limitation of imagination that often exists for pastors who care well for their families. That becomes a major barrier, that actually their good character that qualifies them for ministry is an impediment on their ability to understand and begin to see the context in which their congregants are coming to them.
Well, I think you have picked it up beautifully, my friend. There are sinister leaders out there. There are bullies out there. But I do think in Sarah's story, we wanted to show exactly what you've picked up on, that there is a lack of imagination that really will only be overcome once you encounter and understand the complexities of the problem. And part of that was to illustrate, if I can show, and we as a team can show pastors watching along, listening along to our discussions, the weight and burden that Pastor Dave carried as he wrestled with his own guilt and shame of quote unquote missing it, maybe you don't have to miss it. And I think that's really what longing of my heart. There's a lot of great pastors out there who are humble, gentle, loving people, and it is hard for them to fathom that there could be more to the story than just a communication problem. Let's shift gears for just a little bit and talk about pastoral ministry. Is there a way, I know Pastor Dave laments a little about using Ephesians 4, which is a beautiful passage. It precedes Ephesians 5, naturally, that pastors use a lot. Is there a way that we can faithfully teach biblical concepts and still safeguard their misuse or their corruption or their misapplication? What's a good way for us to preventatively filter our exegesis, as you put it, to include exegeting circumstances beyond our imagination, maybe?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think at one level, this seems rather self-evident. We should recognize that what we mean is not necessarily what people hear and what couples try to enact. Any pastor who has ever had somebody quote a line out of their sermon and a congregation member tells you what they heard you say, there's a decent probability that you may not recognize what they're saying when they quote you.
Right.
And so let's take a word. Again, I'm still in the playful zone.
Yeah.
Let's take a word like leadership. And you take a fifth grade boy and you need him to lead his peers.
Yeah.
As soon as he hears the word leadership, he becomes Mussolini. Like what he does with that is like, you're like, no, that's not what I meant. And he's going, but I am a leader.
Yeah.
And so here, when we preach and teach, especially on marriage, again, I think this is a theme that if we walk it out slowly, we can be okay with. When we teach on general spiritual growth, we don't assume the sanctification of our members.
Okay.
So when we talk about the freedom that we have in Christ, we still feel the need to qualify. Like that doesn't mean sin boldly and just ask for forgiveness later.
Okay.
We don't assume the sanctification of our members. In the same way, let's not assume the healthiness in the marriages in our congregation.
Yeah.
Those same type of qualifications that we would bring when it comes to sanctification, let's have that same check and caution and what needs to be clarified. Yeah. And so when we teach on forgiveness, that would mean we communicate as much about what we don't mean as what we do mean.
We're good, yeah.
And so a common illustration for me there is forgiveness, kind of one of the clearest biblical parallels, pictures behind the word, is canceling a debt. Yeah. Now, canceling a debt is not the same thing as giving another loan or going into business together. Like that goes into trust. Yeah. That isn't acting like the debt never happened. That how do we operationally define forgiveness? Like, again, another phrase that I use a good bit. Forgiveness means I am taking the step to express hurt as hurt rather than hurt as anger.
Yeah.
Forgiveness doesn't mean I'm not hurt. And if we say that and somebody's like, oh, I can't even express hurt as hurt without that being like, that's going to be offensive. Okay, well, they're trying to forgive somebody who wants to act as if their offense never happened. Yeah. So often with themes like headship, we simply teach the what.
Yeah.
You are to lead as husbands. And we so neglect the how. Yeah. Like there should be a tone and a process that goes along with when we teach on these themes that are really powerful. And they're powerful for great good and they're powerful for great harm. And the more powerful the truth is that you're teaching, the more care you should have in how you teach it.
Wow. Yeah. Fantastic. So qualifying isn't talking down to anybody. It's not reducing the passage to infantile steps, but it does recognize that our congregants our parishioners are all in a different stage of maturity, and that language is different and language is diverse enough that it might require us to slow down a little bit and to talk about subjects like headship beyond the Greek word kephale to things like, what does that look like in practice? How did Jesus illustrate this in his life? How can we model that in marriage and in church? I love that, Brad. And it's a simple reminder, but sometimes we as pastors, we fall flat there because we're maybe, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think sometimes we're more concerned with sounding theological and maybe making sure we have the right held theology without exercising the practical theological muscles that we need.
Oftentimes we're just so passionate.
Yeah.
Like I'm pro-passion. My voice will do that goofy little thing that happens when you get real excited about something. But in that passion that conveys the importance of what we're talking about, we just use our time with passion and we miss clarity.
Yeah.
We miss process. And the easier it is for something to be misused, the more time we ought to give to how to use it well.
Very well said. Yeah, absolutely. Man, fantastic. We're going to come back and respond a little bit more to pastoral ministry, but I want to address something with the audience real quick. You know, you've heard me several times now reiterate that sometimes things from our past don't stay there, that sometimes hurts and wounds, they linger. They need more attention than maybe we ourselves can give them. That's why we need help. And the journey and the process, our sponsor for these episodes for this season 1, specializes in helping people. They focus on finding freedom from the weight of trauma, difficult experiences. They use a variety of methods, a variety of techniques like EMDR and brain spotting. But more than that, they have a team that fits your needs. They have several pathways to healing, including confidential sessions with licensed therapists, but also trauma-informed biblical counselors, personal coaching that can help you, supportive groups that can give you resources and information. Basically, friends, you don't have to carry the weight forever, and you don't have to carry it alone. So start the conversation. Visit our friends at thejourneyandtheprocess.com. That's thejourneyandtheprocess.com. And we thank them again for sponsoring season 1, Sarah's story. Brad, I want to go back to Pastor Dave for a minute. I'd like to cue up clip number 2, if we could. This is a continuation of what we listened to earlier, but it's one of my favorite lines, and I think it evidences what we wanted to communicate about Pastor Dave's heart. So let's play clip number 2.
What I was really telling her, without realizing it, was that her desire for safety was a spiritual failure. I asked her to pray for Mark, to examine her own heart, and I gave her the number of a biblical counselor. I thought I had done my job. In reality, I had completely, utterly failed her.
Pastor Dave comes to the conclusion that his well-meaning and well-intentioned choices has failed Sarah, and he's got this air of remorse there. Talk to me a little bit about, again, what Pastor Dave's experiencing and what grace is available for him now.
Yeah, I mean, that's one where if I were to create a parallel example of what happened here, let's imagine I go to the dentist and my gums are bleeding, and the dentist looks at it and doesn't really pay that close attention to the tissue.
Yeah.
I said, Brad, you need to floss more. And they miss those indicators that would go, these are actually abscesses that are much more like a cancer growing in your teeth or in your gums. Like the instruction to go home and floss more results in a delay that allows the problem to become more severe.
Yeah.
And so, this is one where the biggest danger if Pastor Dave gets lost in his sense of guilt and shame is he doesn't learn.
Yeah.
He feels remorse. He may even feel like to the point of disqualified as a pastor. That shame distracts us from learning. This is one where oftentimes pastors get caught in that sense of like, I don't want to assume guilt. Like, did I have to assume that Mark was that degree of an abusive husband?
Right.
No, you don't have to assume guilt, but you should be equally concerned about assuming safety as you were for assuming guilt. And so ask those qualifying questions. Like if we're just saying like, what should Pastor Dave, if we're going, what do we need? What should he learn? Well, hey, get the runway leading into the situation. Like, hey, it seems like something prompted you today to come in. Like you're coming in, that a clue to him is you're coming in unprompted. Something caused you to come into my office when this wasn't on either of our calendars.
Right.
What led up to it? Hey, if I just gave you a spectrum, like 1 to 10 scale, between your home being marked by dishonor right now or being marked by danger, where would you put that number? If you had to say, like, Mark's posture towards you, like if a 1 is concern and a 10 is control, where do you feel like that is? You use the term distant. If distance at 1 and crisis is at 10, where are things? You give a few entry points, because oftentimes we don't appreciate how scary it is. Like, 1, to be confident enough in my assessment that my home is scary.
Right.
And then to come to a pastor and to say, I think my home is dangerous. I think that's a big step. And so let's give just a few scaling things that we can't make her say this early. We can give her several times of approaching the runway if needed. And if we consistently get that lower end of the scale, okay, we tried, we didn't get the information. I think what Pastor Dave is feeling is that he didn't ask any of those exploratory questions and he jumped right in. And it's more that he was premature without clarifying than just that he was wrong.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said, Brad. And thinking through, if we were consulting with Pastor Dave and he comes to us, this is after the fact, right? He's made the call to 911 at this point, and Sarah is in a position of relative safety. We don't know the complete outcome after the ride to mom and dad's house. But Pastor Dave comes to us and says something along the lines of, Chris, Brad, we want to have a church where people feel safe to disclose, but we also want to be confident that we'll address it well. What might be some next steps for Pastor Dave and I want to say Kingsway. I can't remember what I called the church, but Kingsway Christian Church, what might be some next steps for them to be a culture that's safe for victims of abuse?
So in my mind, I hear that in 2 pieces. Mm-hmm. I hear the magnet and I hear the response. How do we present ourselves as safe enough that we draw those who are vulnerable to us?
Right.
And then how do we make sure we're responsible when somebody trusts us with their story? I think for most pastors, when they think, what is it that I need to do to let people know that we understand this? They think, preach a sermon. Yeah. If you'll let me be playful for just a moment. That what is the likelihood that a pastor is going to preach for 20, 30, 40 minutes, however long that pastor gets to preach a sermon, on the subject of abuse and not say anything dumb or offensive in that entire period of time? When they just feel like they're dipping their toe and starting to understand this subject. That's part of the reason we go, how can I talk for this long on this subject and not get lots of emails?
Right.
That here's my, and again, let's assume that the pastor did that. What percentage of your congregation is there on the weekend that you preach that sermon?
Yeah.
And of that percentage of your congregation and the percentage that need to hear it, what percentage of that segment is ready to take some form of step of reaching out when you did that? If you think sermon, you are so limiting the point in time influence that you have. Here's what I would say in terms of the magnet piece. Don't neglect the power of your list. When you preach and teach every single time, you're going to give a list. Hey, like this passage talks about suffering, whether that is you just recently got a diagnosis of cancer, whether that your parents just passed away. You're going to go through several things that are a list of that example. what you need to recognize is your congregation is listening to your list. And if their struggle is never on your list,
Yeah.
they don't think they can talk to you.
Yeah.
If your struggle is on their list, they're like, oh, my pastor's available to me. Well, then you don't have to worry about getting everything right in a sermon, wrapping it up like a sitcom, and making everything neat in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You get to listen. You get to be in a supportive posture as you learn alongside. And so just let themes of control, of abuse, of sexual abuse, let those themes make your list periodically. Doesn't have to be every week.
No.
But if that, you can sprinkle that in throughout the year, you're going to hit more of your congregation, and you're going to hit them when they're at that point of readiness.
Yeah.
And so that's the magnet. In terms of readiness, you've already mentioned the project you and I did together with a team of other people, becoming a church that cares well for the abused. That was meant to be a first aid primer.
Right.
Of just bringing people from a variety of fields who are strong evangelical believers who love the church but have experience with abuse. So that would be a tool you could use. Chris, your book on the heart of domestic abuse, that would be a great staff reading. Darby Strickland's book, Is It Abuse? Make something like that a required staff reading. Have a staff training where you just invite a social worker from your community into your church. You're going to do two things if you do that. One, your church is going to get to ask questions, and you're going to learn what it is to come alongside of somebody in a crisis, not just give advice. Secondly, you're going to be building a relationship with a social worker where you show yourself to be a good faith partner, that when that rut-row moment comes and you're not sure what to do, that you've got somebody that you've shown yourself to be a good faith actor with, that you can reach out and say, hey, can I run this by you and get some guidance? Another thing that when a victim, be it a past victim or a present victim, when they entrust you with their story, listen. Don't get so overwhelmed by what you need to say that you don't listen. That like we talked about that limit of imagination. When you listen well, that expands your imagination. Where I got most of my training was one, listening to people who this was their story. And then working in an interdisciplinary context. Where I was much more parachurch than local church, and I was working with social workers and different people in a variety of contexts on a regular basis. And I would just say, hey, here's what I do. Describe for me what you do. It would help me to understand how we complement one another, where we overlap and where we're different. And I found that they were really excited to have that conversation. They did not look at me like I was stupid. They appreciated me as if I was humble, and we started having really good conversations.
That's fantastic. I have obviously a similar experience, having worked in the secular world for a long time in this work, and found that I thought I was benefiting from going to trainings and going to federal trainings and statewide trainings. I later found out that the team was benefiting from me because they'd never had a pastor. So having insight into how the church operates, or ecclesiology, or even that there's a vast amount of evangelical theology when it comes to certain issues, was something that many of my friends in the secular world weren't even aware of.
I've got a friend who is like my go-to social worker, that when something comes up and I'm like, this isn't a horse, it's a zebra. And I get that sense of disorientation. Her first name is Jen. I call Jen. She happens to be a member of our church. The degree of appreciation she has for having her voice and background valued. Like, I tell her thank you each time we talk, and she tells me thank you, like, for listening. But what you just said, I have absolutely seen, where when she's working with churches, like, again, she's a little cynical edge to her. She's like, Brad, I need to understand, is this like a church thing or is this a cult thing? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And kind of walking through and me getting to provide that perspective of church world, what those processes, mindset, vocabulary, that kind of thing is, in the same way that she translates for me, it becomes a wonderfully symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, agreed. I think the way you put it in Church Cares, in the book and in the training program, that was helpful. It might be helpful to reiterate now in the brief, is the intersection of Matthew 18 and Romans 13. Can you just, and I know we might not be able to do it in the time we have remaining, Brad, but can you unpack for us a little bit about the role of church discipline and the church's role in addressing this? I mean, if Pastor Dave is aware of Matthew 18, 2 Corinthians 5, Titus, other aspects of church discipline that he could have utilized, can you walk us through that briefly?
So let's go back to conversation 1 between Sarah and Pastor Dave. Let's assume he asks some qualifying questions. He learns about the locket, and he's like, over $30, you were locked in your room. And he gets that internal sense of his imagination is being expanded. Yeah. And he's like, we need to do church discipline. My first statement to Pastor Dave is you go at Sarah's pace. Yeah. The most dangerous time for Sarah or any other victim in this kind of situation is when they initially reach out for help. That when Mark realizes that his exclusive control and ability to narrate what is going on has been broken, that's when he's going to be most reactive. And so you move at Sarah's pace. That's going to be frustrating. It is. As you're walking with her, because the average victim is going to come forward 7 times, I think that's the number, before they're ready to take any step. If we in that Pastor Dave role do a better job of receiving, hopefully we can take 7 to 5 and 5 to 3. That the better somebody is listened to and received, that number can shrink. That, hey, some of this doesn't just sound immoral. He starts to learn of some of that violence. There's a recognition, hey, this may not just be immoral, this may also be illegal. Let's walk that out. That's where our Romans 13 partners for justice come in. That as counselors get involved. Well, they're not Romans 13 partners for justice in terms of civil authorities. They've got some limits. And so when they're going to counseling, a very appropriate thing for Pastor Dave to ask is, hey, would you guys mind asking your counselor for a release of information so that I can have the opportunity periodically to consult with your counselor? And some of that is cooperation, like just want to hear how things are going. Some of that is to make sure the counselor's getting the full story. Like in that context, if Sarah and Mark come into counseling together, Sarah may not bring up the locket and $30. That may have just come out in the pastor's office. And the pastor being able to say early, like, hey, did Sarah bring up the thing about the locket? That's, again, with the release of information, that's an appropriate thing to do. And so sometimes we make church discipline as if it is just about membership. And yes, church discipline is the way that we make sure we have a regenerative church membership. But we can become so outcome focused on member or not a member that we miss the process that should ensure ownership of sin, understanding of impact and growth. Those are things that, even if the right people are involved, Pastor Dave at the church level is going to have, he's the coordinating agent of those right efforts having the right impact in the life of the local church.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you for that. We could do a whole nother hour on just that process, but I will recommend Becoming a Church That Cares. I think there's great information in there about that. And maybe Brad and I can have a conversation about that in the future. Brother, where can folks find you? What are some resources that might help this population that you have?
Yeah, if you're interested in the things that I've done, bradhambrick.com, just my first and last name, that's kind of the centralizing place where I have the good fortune of being on a church staff, which means I get to put up a lot of stuff for free. There's a lot of counselors that they kind of make their living with their resources. Because of my role, there's a lot more stuff that I'm able to put out there for free. I think on the subject we've been talking about, Becoming a Church That Cares Well for the Abused, and the book that I did on navigating destructive relationships, those would probably be maybe the first couple of resources that I've worked on that people might be interested in.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad Hambrick, for joining us today and for your friendship. Thank you, friends, for tuning in, viewing, listening. We really appreciate you. If you could do something for us, it would greatly help Peace Interrupted. If you could rate, review, subscribe, follow, whatever the platform you're listening or watching on asks you to do, it helps others find Peace Interrupted, and it also lets the platform know that you value the show. And if you think that today's conversation would benefit someone that you know, would you share this with them? We'd love to serve them in any way possible. And always want to encourage you to share Sarah's story, because the more the church learns about coercive control, the more we can address it responsibly. I want to thank Journey in the Process for sponsoring Season 1 once again, and want to remind you, listener and viewer, the Word of God says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Until next time, peace to you.
You know, we talk a lot about the hard stuff, trauma, abuse, and the toll that it takes on your mind, body, and spirit. And we want you to know you don't have to walk that alone. The Journey in the Process is a trauma-specialized counseling center committed to helping individuals heal from deep wounds through clinically excellent, biblically grounded care. With offices in North Carolina and Texas, telehealth services across 5 states, and biblical counseling available globally, our team of highly trained Christian therapists and certified biblical counselors integrate faith and whole person, evidence-based practices to address trauma at its root. We believe that healing is possible because Jesus still sets the captives free. If you're ready to take that next step toward peace, visit www.thejourneyandtheprocess.com. Trauma doesn't have to eat your lunch forever. There is hope, and we are here to help you find it. Now, let's get back to this week's episode.